Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to briefly talk to you about cooperation among cooperatives in its various forms, basing myself on the book Cooperativism at Work, which I edited and partly wrote. The book was published at Routledge in February 2026, and it was endorsed by a few key economists, Thomas Piketty, among others. When you mention cooperatives, you usually first imagine the individual cooperative, like a worker cooperative or an agricultural cooperative or a consumer cooperative. But actually, behind this reality, there is a much larger and quite sophisticated organizational construction established among cooperatives, and which probably constitutes one of the main engines of their development. This organizational structure among cooperatives explains to a large extent how and why cooperatives are today over 3 million, including over 300,000 worker-owned ones, why cooperative employment is today estimated to be around 10% of the world's employed population, including around 15 million people in worker-owned cooperatives, why cooperatives constitute a considerable share of GDP in many countries, like 7% in France or Germany, 8% in Italy, or 18% in New Zealand, or why they stand for a considerable share of marketing of agricultural products, like 25% in the US, or why they are largely responsible for the development of entire prosperous regions, like Italy's Emilia-Romagna or Spain's Basque country. This inter-cooperative reality is guided by the sixth cooperative principle of cooperation among cooperatives and has to do with a meso-level. In other words, an intermediary economic dimension between the micro level of the cooperatives as individual enterprises and the macro level of the macroeconomy. Basically, cooperation among cooperatives can take the form of networks, representative organizations, agencies, or entrepreneurial groups. The book shows examples of all four types and shows to what extent these structures have been and continue to be fundamental to the development of the grassroots cooperatives and also how they interact among each other in a coherent whole. First, networks among cooperatives are often the first stage in the field of cooperation among cooperatives. They often gradually generate representative organizations, agencies, or entrepreneurial groups. There are several examples of cooperative networks in the case studies of the book, for example, in Greece and in California. Networks among cooperatives or among cooperative promoters based on peer learning were also how the international cooperative movement came into being in the first place, and also how the cooperative principles were gradually elaborated as of the 17th century, or probably even earlier. Cooperative representative organizations are similar to representative organizations among other social movements or interest groups. But apart from their role in representing their member cooperatives with governments or other institutions, and in co-creating public policies for the promotion of cooperatives, they often gradually develop a direct agency function on their members' cooperatives, for example, in the fields of advisory services or in training and education. It's also worth noting that national representative organizations of cooperatives emerged very early in history. We find the first ones appearing in Germany and Britain in the 1850s and 1860s, respectively. The first national representative organizations among worker cooperatives appeared in the 1880s in Britain and in France. Many national representative organizations of worker cooperatives have been established over the last few decades, for example, in the United States, Brazil, in Spain, in Japan, in South Korea, and so on. The book describes the evolution of cooperative representative organizations in all 15 countries where its case studies are located. We see that their evolutionary trend is to gradually develop territorial and sometimes sectoral structures in their midst, as is the case in the three countries where worker-owned cooperatives are most developed, namely Italy, France, and Spain. Still in the field of representative organizations, but this time at the international level, the International Cooperative Alliance, or ICA, established in 1895 after 3 decades of earlier attempts and preparatory work and networking, is one of the first international representative organizations for any social movement or interest groups. It was established before the present international representative organizations of trade unions and of enterprises in general were established. The ICA has among its missions to work in close contact with the United Nations system. The international cooperative movement gathered through the ICA has gradually established sectoral organizations, including SICOPA in the field of worker-owned and artisans cooperatives, and regional organizations like Cooperatives Europe, which are in close contact with the corresponding public regional organizations. Cooperative agencies can originate directly from networks or be established by representative organizations. A whole chapter of the book focuses on how a financial agency in Italy, established by the 3 Italian cooperative confederations with the support of the trade unions, called Cooperazione Finanza Impresa, or CFI, promotes the development of worker-owned cooperatives, by which we mean worker cooperatives and social cooperatives, in particular in the field of worker buyout. The agency in question uses funds originally coming from the state through a specific law and invests them as equity, but in a not-for-profit fashion, in individual cooperatives or in enterprises in crisis that are to be converted into cooperatives. The chapter shows that this agency is successful because it is adapted to the cooperative financial structure. 2, it has a very high leverage effect on both the cooperative members and on other financial institutions. And 3, it provides not only funds, but also vital expertise and advice, which strongly reduces the rate of failure and therefore ensures the financial sustainability of the agency itself, which basically can now function through its own funds, reinvesting them again and again. The state gains on all fronts because the failing enterprises that are converted into generally successful cooperatives end up paying taxes which largely exceed the public money which had been originally invested. Cooperative entrepreneurial groups with a horizontal structure, replicating the logic of grassroots cooperatives at a higher level, are one of the most original forms of cooperation among cooperatives. The first of these groups that appeared in history appeared in Britain in the 1860s among consumer cooperatives. The first ones among worker cooperatives, and which are still in existence today, appeared in Italy at the beginning of the 20th century. Then this early Italian practice of creating horizontal entrepreneurial groups among worker cooperatives was relayed as of the 1980s among social cooperatives, which were born in the 1960s in Italy to a large extent from within the worker cooperative movement. One of the most illustrative and famous examples of a horizontal business group among cooperatives is Mondragon, which also has a specific chapter in the book and which has evolved from a handful of local worker cooperatives into one of the main enterprise groups in Spain. The group structure maintains the horizontal logic of cooperatives and provides different entrepreneurial levels from the individual grassroots cooperatives to the head structure of the group with intermediary structures in between. The cooperative group provides important business scales in the fields of finance, training and education, R&D, internationalization, and so on. Now, it's interesting to observe that a group like Mondragon can also have an indirect promotion effect. In fact, most of the cooperatives in the Basque country of Spain are not part of Mondragon, but the Mondragon model has indirectly helped promote cooperatives in that region, which has become one with the highest density of cooperatives in the world, and also one with the highest level of equality in the world. And this is logical because cooperatives generate equality, as is also explained in the book. All these meso-level structures among cooperatives are, like cooperatives themselves, democratic, autonomous from the state or other actors, and non-speculative. They act in coordination among each other in a coherent whole and are one of the key factors in the resilience and development of cooperatives worldwide. This topic of cooperation among cooperatives and of the meso-level is discussed in more depth in the book Cooperativism at Work. You will find a general presentation on the book in the same YouTube channel called Cooperativism at Work, like the book.